Come to bcvort.com and comment every day for your chance to win 2-player mega bundles.
Hi guys, and welcome to another build video. In this one, I'm going to be looking at the German Tiger 1. And this is the mid-production Tiger 1, or well, early mid-production Tiger 1. This will be the one that would be used by the guys at the boot camp, the Germans, if they were fighting in Tunisia. So what I have under camera here, you can see all the parts are all laid out. They're all pre-clipped. Or sorry, I have clipped them all and cleaned all the parts up and laid it all out so that it's going to be a bit easier for me to follow. So what we want to start with is the lower hull. So I'm going to move the turret parts out of the way first. Here, move the upper hull out of the way too. And we're going to get stuck into the hull. So I'll move even those side plates and stuff out of the way. Now, what I'm going to start with is our lower hull. We'll start with this piece first. So we're just going to put the track sections onto that straight away. I'm just going to run a line of glue along there. And slot that into place. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? So far, so good. Same again on the other side. I have to say as well, while I'm doing this, a big thank you to all the feedback from the previous 2 builds. I was checking out a lot of the comments. And yeah, particularly on the 88. I do agree that, you know, 3 hands would have been handy for that as well, but there you go. So we have the tracks in place. We're going to put the front plate of the hull on next. And the front plate is basically, you want to make sure that this curve is to the bottom, because up here is a towing lug or a place for a shackle. So again, I'm just going to glue along the bottom edge here and just follow that up the sides, and this should slot in pretty neatly, I hope. Okay, like that. So that looks good. And what I'm going to do, just because I'm not overly confident of my gluing here, I'm just going to add a little bit more right in to the corners. Just the sides there, like that. Now, we'll move around to the back of the tank and we'll get our back plate on. So again, the back plate just sort of glues onto the lower flat and has a little bit of a lip, so we can just run the glue just slightly on the inside of the back of the hull here. Like that. And then that will sit in. Hopefully sit in. Yep. Make sure it's all lining up and it's not interfering with other parts of the model. That seems pretty good. So that's the back plate in. Now, we'll start on the side plates as well. So let's move other bits out of the way here. There's a couple of features in this model I'm going to show off shortly as well. I have the sprue sat beside me. Now, onto the side plates. So they're obviously sided, but we're just going to, simple enough, run the glue along this edge and then up the beveled edge at the back. And then that will sit in like so. All the tow cable detail on it, and a couple of the, I think they're called S-mine launchers, but for the most part people call them smoke grenade launchers or grenade launchers. So this little piece here, and this little piece here, which is just behind the front left headlight as well. You'll see that more clearly once the model's built. And we'll talk a bit more about it once I actually have the model put together. And again, same on the other side. Just along there. Center the model up a little bit more for you. And again, it's just a matter of getting in there and letting the parts line up. Like so. So it's starting to look like a Tiger. Maybe a Tiger still in the factory, but it is starting to look like one. Next step, I want to put the front glacis plate in, or part of the front transmission cover. And Oh, there's too much glue running off that needle there, so just clear that off. Okay, and along there as well. And this should all sit in fairly easily. Make sure that it's lined up at the front where it needs to be. Like so. I will say, these parts are going together very neatly. I'm very impressed with this so far. I've never built one of these ones before, the plastic ones. So. Right, next. I may have put this in the wrong order, but let's try it anyway. We'll get this, the front glacis. Or glacis, or whatever people want to call it. And glacis sort of sounds good to me. So that needs pushed in and lined in. And I'm just going to check what that looks like. That looks pretty good. Nice solid fit there. Now, we're going to put the mud guards on here. Now, I have 2 clipped out, but I want to show on the sprue quickly. Just move the tank out of the way. We have 2 sets of dust guards. So we have this set, which is perfect, all nice and brand factory new. And then we have this set, which is all damaged and warped and bent. And I like this, so I just thought, yeah, we'll do that. So they'll line up. There's 2 dots on the front and the back of the hull, and they will line up on those. But the simple rule of thumb is just to run a line of glue along the bottom edge of the armor plate on the side. Grab one of these. They're not sided, so well, as far as I know, they're not sided. And that will just sit on. Maybe they are sided. No, they seem to be okay. What I may do is just grab a pair of clippers here quickly and just make sure that the part presses flat. Just do that with the edge of the clippers. That gives a good tight fit and keeps everything lined up correctly. Same again on the other side. You can see my hand isn't so steady. Because I'm filming this as soon as we started the boot camp this morning, I'm a little bit tired because I've only had 1 coffee. I've only had 1. I haven't even finished drinking that one yet. Right, same again. Just with the, hang on, let me get this in a way that I can actually do it. Same with the clippers. Give it a little press. Make sure it's actually lining the parts up correctly too would be handy. Make sure that's right. I know I'm drifting, don't worry about it. So, there we go, that felt like a piece that got into its position. There we go. Now, let's move and, well, sorry, let's add the bow machine gun first. That would probably be the next natural spot for us. And it's sitting right there too, that's handy. Tiny little dot of glue. I can get it out of the bottle. There we go. Just the tiniest little dot of glue. And that'll just push in. It lines up because it has a little bit on the back of the ball mount. And it just sits in nice and neatly and is pretty well lined up once it's in place. So that looks pretty good to me. Next step is the upper hull, which is that. Now, there is another piece I'm going to add in a moment, but I'm just going to get my glue points all done here first. So in around the back of the exhaust, this little piece, these little corner pieces here, which are little sticky out parts. There's a couple just behind the glacis. And then along this side. And that ought to do it. This should then, in theory, settle into the top hull. I just need to push the machine gun back on. Yep, that looks pretty solid to me. Tank's even still sitting rather level, so that's good. I'm just going to double check this machine gun. It's there, it's stuck, it's okay. I think that looks okay. Bit of an oddity at the back, but it's all lining up. Yeah, it's lining up fine. Shouldn't be worrying too much about that. Next step, to make this tank more compliant with like the early to mid production Tiger, we have these, and these are I believe they're called the Feifel air filters. You guys that know Tiger 131 at Bovington will know these are big air filters that sit off the back of the hull, but with big pipes going into the inlets. These were taken off for a internal Under Armour type of air filtration system, pretty much after the North African campaign, because the Feifel air filters that were on it, or the Feigel, or I cannot, tell me if I'm wrong. I call them Feifel. But I think these were the ones that would have clogged with sand really, really quickly. And after the North African campaign, they never really saw desert conditions again, maybe out in Russia during high summer. Kursk, for example, would have been a very dusty place to be in a Tiger. But this filtration system was mainly on the initial production early and the start of the mid-productions. They started to get rid of it in the full run of the mid-production changes to change the air filtration system and a few other systems on the tank, including the Commander's cupola, which changed. Also some of the telescopic systems for the gunner, I think some of those changed as well. It went from a binocular to a monocular. I'm pretty sure it went from bino to mono. Anyway, that's not the point. Feifel air filters removed after once the mid-production stuff got into full swing. And on the tank, I'll get a bit closer there. On the tank, if you wanted to make it a Russian era mid-production Tiger, you would stop here on the hull. You would leave these off, because that would be what you would see on the engine deck, is just a little touch of a vent up here. In the meantime, we are building a Desert Era one, or Tunisia one. So let's get my glue onto that spot. Let's put some glue onto the inside areas of the filtration system, or the filter boxes. The first thing I'm going to do is push the filter boxes onto the back of the hull, and then press the central part down. So that's what you end up with, and that generally denotes an early production Tiger 1, or the beginning of mid-production retrofits and refits. That's now our hull complete. Let's move on to the business end of the tank. So we now have our turret. And the turret isn't in too many parts, and I have a little bit of a gripe as well, but I'll come to that in a moment. First thing I want to do, quickly dry fit the mantlet. The mantlet sort of just sits loose in there, that's fine. So we're going to glue the upper and lower turret pieces together. Should be pretty straightforward. There's a nice little lip in there for you to get a glue needle in. And these parts will sit in together like so. And before we glue the gun on, we will just glue the mantlet on, because I want the mantlet to be set before we go with the gun. And to line it up all properly, there is a slot in the back of the mantlet that fits in to the parts just on the inside of the gun mount. Oops. Again, I can hear people in the comments going, "Need 3 hands, John, need 3 hands, make it happen." I'm sorry. So that's the mantlet in place. Now, I'm going to move on to the commander's hatch. And I do have a touch of a gripe on this one. It's probably purely from a modeling perspective or a casting perspective. But I'm going to show it anyway, just because I can. So we have here, this is the early production, the initial and early production cupola for the Commander. Now, the sprue has an open version, which I've clipped out and subsequently changed. And here it is here. Now, you Tiger enthusiasts will know what's wrong with this straight away, is that this hatch did not open all the way to a horizontal position. It, in reality, it opened to about just beyond the vertical, so about there, because it has like a latch system on it that lets the hatch open and locks it into this sort of position. Then you pull a pin and the hatch will shut again. So I was initially going to do this hatch and put a commander in it, and I thought, the hatch is bugging me, and I was like, it's bugging me too much. So I just decided to go with the closed hatch instead. So, yeah. Anyway, let's fit the cupola. And there we go. So you can see where the way the hatch sits, it would open towards the inside of the turret. Unlike later model tanks, even the late mid-production models where they changed the cupolas to the one with all the periscopes on it, it would lift up and rotate out and sit off the side of the turret rather than come up this way. I'm not sure why it was done like this, but it's a very nicely done little hatch. Anyway, right, we'll move on to the back bustle, or the stowage bin, and that's going to require just 2 lines of glue. Very easy to note where you need to put the glue here, because the texture sort of goes from this little tiny bit of a rough texture to a completely smooth one, and you can see the vertical lines. You also have 2 slots here which line up with the top of the bin, and we just press that down. Oh, or not, as the case may be. It wants to defy me this morning. There we go. And what I can do is just put a couple more dots of glue if I'm not happy with the bond. Just right at the bottom of the bin, like so. And that'll settle in rather nicely. Now, I'm going to put the spigot on. Do you notice what I'm doing, guys? I'm annoying you by not putting the gun on yet. So we're just going to put the spigot in. Of course, if you have magnets, of course, use magnets. Just go for it, because the magnets are very handy indeed. Makes transporting easier. Finally, the gun. Bit of glue into the bottom of the hole, the latch hole, and press the gun in. Make sure it's lining up. Make sure that everything is settled in a good position, and then we push the 2 parts together, and there you have your Tunisia campaign Tiger 1. And this is a gorgeous kit. I can remember playing ages ago, way back when I got the Tiger Marsh box that had Wittmann and one of the Zugs from Wittmann's troop, and I loved the resins and metals. The tracks always were a bit of a disappointment, but you know, a lot of players were just happy enough with it. It didn't matter. Then we got plastic tracks, and we thought, oh, this is getting interesting. And then now the full plastic kits, and hats off to them. Fantastic kit, beautiful looking model, absolutely. Enough about the model though. You're here if you're here for historical. Stay right here, right now. If you're not here for historical and you want to look at the model, hang on. Let's have another look at the model. So I'll just do the little spin. He's on the catwalk. So he's this guy's at the Flames of War boot camp fashion show, and he is sporting a 88mm gun, which is pretty new and out there for tank fashion in 1942, 43, in 1943 even. Anyway, enough of that. So if you're here for the model, thanks for watching. If you're here for the historical side, here we go. So Tiger 1, the first time the Allies, the Western Allies, I must note, came across this was in Tunisia. So the British and the Americans came across these in limited numbers in the desert. Let's be honest, there wasn't a huge amount of them anywhere at this point in the war. The Russians had captured 4 outside Leningrad before. I believe it was about a few months before. I cannot remember off the top of my head when Leningrad was. They captured a bunch, sent reports to the Western Allies, and said, Germany has something that's interesting and scary. And they were like, okay, fair enough. And there's a lot of historical notes from the Desert Campaign of when we first encountered tigers. A lot of veterans, particularly in Churchill troops, that never seen tigers. They said you never saw it, but you seen its effect. You know, tanks exploding next to them and holes just being punched straight through the 100mm front armor of a Churchill. Very scary stuff. Tiger 1 turns up, and does an amazing amount of damage out there. But as for most of its career, it was just never there in the numbers that was required. Same with Panther, although Panther had a lot more being done, a lot more said for it. It was a bigger production tank. There was far more of them around. In Tunisia, the Tiger that we all know today as Tiger 131, which resides in Bovington Tank Museum, which I'm going to go and see very soon, and I hope to get a little bit of video for you guys, and I'll show it on the website at some point after the trip. 131 was captured because of a bunch of fluke shots. There's a lot of story, a lot of people telling the story out there. I'm not going to recount it here. But it wasn't the first Tiger to be captured. It wasn't the first Tiger that we got our hands on. Neither the same with the Americans. There was a Tiger before that, or one or two Tigers before that. But they weren't in the best of shape. They'd taken a fair amount of hits, and there was stuff damaged. It could be recovered, but they decided, well, because we can't drive it away ourselves or anything like that, we're just going to test some explosives on it. So what happened was that one of the Tigers the Americans got their hands on, they put a load of blocks of C4 under the front transmission of it. No idea why. I think they just wanted to see how much the tank would take. I believe they took about 2 or 3 pallets worth of C4 blocks, probably about a half-ton worth or a quarter-ton worth, and they set this stuff off, and of course they blew the tank into smithereens. No tank necessarily can survive that sort of an explosion right underneath it. There was a couple others that were taken away and used as targets just to see, or tests. A lot of metallurgy tests were done on pieces of Tigers that they'd found, or Tigers that they'd blown up. But when 131 came around, they realized they had a tank that they could take home back to Britain and properly study, because it was in perfect condition. The turret ring was jammed. All they needed to do was lift the turret off, fix all that up, reface the metals and stuff like that, slap the turret back down, take it out with a gun crew and see what it could do. And the reports they brought back from that were very interesting and very scary. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here and say it was utterly criminal of the Allied nations, the governments and the military leadership, to think for 1 minute that the tanks they had, the Sherman, the Grant, and later the Cromwell, and to an extent the Comet as well, particularly the American 76mm guns, it was criminal that those governments and those military leaders believed and had to believe, or didn't have enough push on them to think, we might need a tank that can take something like this on. I've read a lot of Max Hastings lately mentioning Tigers and what the Allied soldiers on the ground thought compared to what the governments thought. The governments were looking at the numerical superiority. We had 58,000 Shermans. The Russians had, 48 to 55,000 T-34s during the mid to late war period. The Russians were putting bigger tanks out too, but they weren't for tank fighting in general. But they were up gunning, they were up armoring. The crews were getting better. The tanks were coming out in great numbers. And what happened was that when the governments looked at it, they seen the numbers, and the military leaders looked at it and seen the numbers. The standard Cromwell crew, T-34 crew, and the Sherman crews didn't care about how many tanks they had behind them. They cared about that immediate moment when they fired their gun at a Tiger and a Panther at the front and watched the shell bounce off and realized, we are dead. And since then, tank design has become better. It's more about crew survivability, because as a couple of historians have said, a good tank crew is more valuable than a good tank. And that is something that was largely ignored, or largely people were unaware of during the Second World War. Had we had better tanks at the time, our crews would have been a bit more confident, and arguably, to a sense, the Allied armies may have had a bit more push about them, a bit more aggression, especially in the armoured forces, which were basically meant to be the spearhead every time they moved somewhere. The armour went first, mechanised infantry, artillery, air support, and that was the combined arms wing of it. And we had this information on this little tank. We had this information in 1942-43, and we couldn't do anything about it. That's a little bit of a political run, I have to admit. But the Tiger in itself is a fantastic piece of equipment to look at, to hear it when it's driving around at Bovington, which I can't wait for, and to have it on the tabletop in Flames of War. And, you know, this thing should definitely be one of your highlights as a German Afrika Korps player. Beautiful little machine, beautiful model kit. And yeah, so historical rant over. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you're enjoying the coverage of the boot camp. Put your comments down below. I've been skulking around in the other two that I've done, and I've really enjoyed the feedback. Yes, beanies are a health and safety piece of clothing, so thank you very much for your comments. Hope you enjoyed this one too. I'll see you again soon.